Mi español es terrible. So I will be doing this in English. I hope that everyone understands. I would encourage you. You may want to move up a little because I have lots of words, muchas palabras on my slides, and they're a little bit difficult to see from the back when I tested earlier. You can have access to these slides. I will give them to Samuel and Maite so you can have them, but it may be a little bit difficult in the interim. So what I'm going to talk about is the impact of mobile on retail, and I'll share with you a little bit of the data that we're seeing from retailers, and then also what it means and what you can do to address this and make sure that every merchant, whether you are a retailer or you work with retailers, can make the most out of the change in how shoppers are shopping. So I want to just do a high level, we call it our 30,000 foot view of what's happening in commerce. And already we're seeing a significant portion shifting to the e-commerce and online retail channel. So I, until a few months ago, was at Forrester Research, which is a technology research company. And one of the things that we would do is e-commerce forecasts for about 25 or 30 different countries around the world. And what we have here is basically a summary of 4 of the regions. And what you can see is that Western Europe, actually everywhere in the world, it's year over year double-digit growth in e-commerce. And collectively, together, throughout the entire world, e-commerce should, by 2019, 2020 be 1 trillion US dollars. At this point, the euro and the dollar are about the same, so that's probably about 1 trillion euros. And what we see is that in all of Western Europe, e-commerce is trending to be about a little bit north of 200 billion euros, which is about, it's a little bit less than what the US does now. The US is about 300 billion US dollars. China is the biggest e-commerce market in the world. It's now over $600 billion, and a lot of that is peer-to-peer, and most of that is Alibaba, but that's sort of the way that it is. So e-commerce growing very rapidly everywhere. There are 3 main reasons that everybody is shopping online. It is convenience, selection, and value. And what that means is that it's easy to shop online. You don't have to worry about parking. You don't have to worry about traffic. You get vast selection and assortment. Virtually everything that you could possibly want to buy is available online in some way, shape, or form. And often, we also have value. So there are great companies like Amazon and AliExpress that do a great job giving you anything you want for less than what you could get at a physical store. So those are basically the reasons, and this is data that we've collected from consumers on why they choose to shop online. Also, it is important, and this is where the font and the words get very small, so I apologize. But this is basically for each of the aggregate e-commerce numbers, it breaks down into about 30 different subcategories. And what we have here is penetration. This is primarily US penetration. There are some variances in market by market, but for the most part, a lot of this trends very similarly. So what we have here is basically on the x-axis, the percent of this category that is transacted online. So not surprisingly, categories like media categories, books, software, video games, they'll be very highly penetrated online. But even if a category is not purchased online, it's still these days researched very heavily online. So you can see there's an inverse correlation between you know, kind of this, you're either purchased heavily online or you're researched heavily online. And the categories that tend to be least penetrated online are categories like automobiles, furniture, and in the United States, we've had some challenges getting decent online grocery penetration, although in Europe, particularly Northern Europe, you see grocery penetration much higher. The UK probably has one of the higher grocery penetrations in the world. That's very much driven by two things. Usually it is the availability of good logistics, which in the US, last mile logistics is still very expensive. And second, it is also by the alternative opportunity, the opportunity cost of purchasing in a physical store. When real estate is very expensive, as it often is in Europe, when the cost of labor is expensive, as it often is in Europe, it's actually more expensive to purchase and own a physical grocery store. So an online grocery store can be more comparable. Whereas in the US, we have lower costs of labor, lower costs of real estate. So it's actually very, very difficult as an online merchant to compete in a category like grocery. So those are some of the variances. I also want to just have a bigger picture here and say that B2C commerce is large and substantial, and on average in most developed markets it's about 8 to 10% of total retail sales. But however large B2C e-commerce is, B2B is even bigger. And this isn't even like EDI transfers and B2B electronic transfers that have been around for decades. This is e-commerce that is happening where businesses are ordering from other businesses, often their office supplies or their equipment, and they are transacting on e-commerce functional websites. And that's that whole sector of e-commerce is young and it's growing, and there is even more opportunity in the B2B sector than in the B2C sector. And that's my point here, is that even by 2019, and this is again US data, in the US alone, that figure is $1 trillion. So globally, that figure is likely easily $3 to $4 trillion. Some of the that e-commerce functionality that is B2B that I am describing, an example here is, this is an example that Infosys has built out particularly for developing countries. And it's essentially mobile functional ordering capabilities that small store owners can leverage in order to buy and offer extended aisle assortments for their customers. So that's sort of the B2B functionality that I'm describing, is that if you are, for instance, a local merchant and you only have a finite supply of inventory in your stores and you want to offer your customers more, it's providing that endless aisle capability for those shoppers. Now, we're here for the Mobile Congress discussion, and I want to share with you a little bit of now getting into where mobile fits in the entire e-commerce and retail ecosystem. And mobile has, for the last 3 years running, been the single biggest investment area and the single biggest priority for retailers. As you can see, this is the list of what are their priorities. And we did this survey in January of this year. Number 1 is mobile. Number 2 is marketing, which is generally customer acquisition and retention. Number 3 is site merchandising. So it's improving how you sell on your physical e-commerce store. And number 4 is omni-channel. We're not going to talk about 2, 3, and 4 today. Number 1, though, is specifically about investments in apps, in responsive design and adaptive design, and also just in general optimizing the mobile e-commerce site. Most retailers are finding, with few exceptions, that it's very, very difficult to get consumers to download their apps. So you typically will focus on the mobile e-commerce site. Mobile is big and it is growing. Right now, what we're seeing is enormous growth rate. So I'll start with the far right side of the slide. So a few years ago, tablet commerce was much bigger than smartphone commerce. What we're seeing now is that tablet commerce is not only slowing down, it's almost irrelevant. We are seeing virtually no one now investing in tablet commerce. I remember probably about 4 years ago, I met one of the heads of e-commerce at Staples, which is a large office supply store. They have, I think, some Staples in Europe as well. And they had a tablet commerce kind of app. They had tablet optimized content. They don't have any of that anymore. Nobody cares about tablets because the tablet hasn't really been that, there hasn't been that much innovation in the tablet, but phones are improving faster, the screen sizes are getting more of the traffic is flowing to the phone as the primary computing device. And usually most retailers are now having the tablet and the desktop functionality essentially be the same. So what we're seeing is that phones now are about, on average for retailers, about 17% of sales, about 29% of their traffic, their total e-commerce traffic, and that growth in sales is growing more than 50% year over year. So really, really rapid growth. That's where a lot of desktop traffic is going. Now, what does that mean from a percent of total? So and these are US numbers. These are roughly similar to what we're seeing in other markets as well. I would suspect that markets like the UK, France, and Germany probably have percents that are similar. Spain, I think, tends to be a little bit less penetrated just because of the availability of merchandise is a little bit different. But in the US, e-commerce last year was about $334 billion. 299 of it was happening either on desktops or tablets. About 35 billion was happening on smartphones. So about 10% of total e-commerce was happening on the smartphone. However, the big point is that for every dollar that happens on the smartphone, almost 30 times as much happens offline. So it's the phone influencing offline sales. And I'll tell you how all of the different ways that we're seeing the phone influence offline sales. But that's a very, very important point because right now, most of the budgets for mobile commerce are coming from the e-commerce teams, not from the store teams. And this data says that it should be coming from the store teams because they've got the most to gain from investments in mobile. And then that's basically the difference here on the right side of the slide. That is web-influenced offline sales. On the left side of the slide are web sales. And these are roughly statistics that you could think about is that 10% of e-commerce happens or less happens on a smartphone, but for every euro spent on a smartphone, you have another 30 euros influenced in physical stores. So retailers are typically focusing on 3 different use cases for mobile. 1, how are store associates using mobile devices in the physical store? And typically, this is a very typical example where a store associate has like a small tablet or they'll have a smartphone. Usually it's in a case that can be pretty protected in case it falls. And usually what it is to do 2 things, is to support endless aisle. So if a consumer can't see a SKU that they want in the physical store, the store associate can order it for them. The second is typically to manage checkout. So it's less common that consumers expect the store associate to be able to check out on a mobile device, but we expect that to happen into the future because those cloud-based POS devices are cheaper, they're easier to get set up, they're fully synchronized with a much more robust web order management system, and for new stores moving forward, we expect that to happen. Usually the upgrade cycle on POS machines can be a decade or more, and that's going to take a long time for stores today to completely rip out their hundreds of millions of dollars in investments and put in mobile functionality for checkout. But in the future, we expect that to happen. In the near term, it really is just about finding items that are not in your physical store, identifying items in nearby stores for customers. So what about apps? And what we're seeing is about 40% of retailers say that they have special apps for their store associates. If they have special apps, usually those apps are designed to to provide endless aisle, showing additional items that are not in the physical store. Also, keep in mind that what is interesting is that I said earlier tablets are essentially dead. However, for retailers, when they invest in mobile in their stores, they are investing in tablets for their store associates because the screen size is bigger. Some of the other things that we're seeing retailers do for their store associates, I think this is a really, really interesting company. It's a company in Seattle called ZipWhip. And what it does is that it allows consumers to text landlines. So right now when you text a landline, because most small retailers, they don't necessarily have phones, right? Or if you look at maybe even a large chain like an El Corte Inglés, they don't have, their store associates aren't picking up smartphones. They have landline phones in the physical store. Or restaurants, for instance, they often have landlines. So what these guys do is that they allow you as a customer you can text a landline. So you can send a text message. There's an interface on the PCs in those stores where they can see the message and they can respond, and it goes back as a text to that customer. So they are able to communicate via mobile even though they may not have mobile devices in physical stores. This is a good bridge solution until more stores become fully mobile enabled. Other solutions that we are seeing to support store associates, these are 4 apps essentially that are also essentially marketplaces that have been created by different companies in order to solve different store associate problems in the physical store. So on the left side, this is about checking store compliance. So there are 2 companies called GoSpot Check and Field Agent, and they're essentially marketplaces for mystery shoppers online, so that if a merchant or a store wants to make sure that in the field that the planogram has been set appropriately, or that the setup of the store is looking good, that is there. On the right side of the slide, these are so interesting. These are 2 of my most fascinating companies. I think it is ShiftGig and Forge. And they're essentially Uber for store associates. So it is a marketplace of labor where if you may not have the same problem in Europe where people just are late for work or they don't show up for work. This happens all the time kind of definitely in the US. And when that happens, you often are short on labor. But what these guys do is they allow you to see in your region or in your, kind of in your vicinity, is there another person who's trained in your systems who could potentially come in quickly and be able to take that shift and help you from a labor standpoint, particularly around the holiday season. That can be really, really interesting. So these are all mobile-driven solutions that are new and innovative. The second thing that we see retailers really focusing on is what are customers doing in stores and how can you help shoppers in the physical store. And there are a few different things that we're seeing that retailers are doing to help customers. It's often about helping them compare prices, redeem coupons, and in some cases, retailers are investing in personalized coupons for customers where they can give certain people who they see as they're coming into a store or around a store different functions and different offers. 2 things, we do not see that a lot of customers really need to have Wi-Fi in physical stores. They're fine with often their carrier network will allow them that functionality. And you don't really see a lot of people actively going and signing into a Wi-Fi network. So that's an important thing. I would get a lot of questions from retailers. Do we need to invest in Wi-Fi in our stores? It's a very expensive investment. And a lot of consumers don't care if they have it or not. So we're not seeing that it's a big deal. The last bit is that consumers are generally they're lukewarm to store-based technologies, and those are things like touch screens in the physical store or kiosks in a physical store. More consumers tend to use their smartphones. At this point, virtually everyone in the developed world, and even in the kind of the developing world, they have phones, and they're expecting to find the information like coupons and store location capabilities in the physical store. Now, some of the things that we are seeing where retailers are investing in physical stores is they're doing a much, much better job, particularly in large format stores, going down to where in the store a particular item is. So this is an example of a department store in the United States called Target, and on their app, they'll identify, they'll geosense what is the nearest store, which is on the left side. And then you can see this is a particular product, and it shows you, I don't know if you can see it, but in aisle A24 in that store, that's where that item is. So it's very much about how can you help customers in the store. I use this functionality all the time because every time I go into the store, I never know where an item is, or I spend time like looking, down the wrong aisle for 10 minutes. So this helps me save time. And same thing. This is an example from a drugstore in the United States. It's a convenience store. In the U.S., we combine our pharmacies and convenience stores, and it's a company called Walgreens, and they'll allow you to also find at a store a particular item. And this is all functionality from the app. What we're also seeing retailers do is to help customers in stores is to manage things like ordering, and particularly mobile functionality is transformational in the restaurant industry. There are probably very few restaurant retailers here, very few even companies that are servicing restaurants right now. I think in 5 to 10 years, this is probably the sector which will be most transformed by retail, by mobile. And it is because it's one of the largest sectors of retail. It's well over $1 trillion globally, but also it is so manual now, and the POS systems have an opportunity to really, really improve and be upgraded. So a couple of examples of how we're seeing mobile support these businesses. One is an example of Starbucks, which is, of course, the coffee company. And what they allow you to do now is you can order ahead on the mobile app. And if you're in the area of a store, you can place your order ahead. You don't need to stand in line. All you have to do is you go to the place where they're handing out the coffees. You go straight there and you can get your coffee and go. It saves so much time, and you don't have to they save money because the order comes in automatically. It doesn't go through the person who's taking the order. On the right-hand side is a restaurant which sells hamburgers, family sit-down restaurant called Red Robin. And what they do is they allow you to pay at the end of the transaction with that device. So you don't have to wait for the waiter or the waitress to come and give you your bill. It's all just sent automatically on that device. Pizza Express in the UK does something similar as well, is that they actually allow you to pay with a QR code, which is even cheaper than having that hardware device. So another form of planning is, we see this with Google in the, kind of even on the search engine, is they help to share with you when our products, or how busy is a store at different times, so that you can better plan your visit. This is an app for a healthcare clinic in the US, and what they do is that it actually says how long the wait is at a nearby clinic, at actually 2 different clinics. There are more than that, but they just kind of showed like one particular one that's closest to you would have a less than 2 hour wait. The other one has about a 58-minute wait. So it helps you decide, I don't want to go now. I want to go later when the wait is shorter. The third use case for mobile is what consumers, so we talked about store associates using mobile devices, consumers using mobile devices in a physical store. Now, the third is kind of what we think of as traditional m-commerce. It's consumers using mobile devices outside a physical store. So what we'll say is that in those cases, a lot of it is about looking up things like location information, also doing price comparisons, doing product comparisons, and it's also important to keep in mind that we know that while consumers on average, spend a lot of time on apps. Usually, most of that time is concentrated in a small handful of apps. Even with shopping, it typically tends to be apps like Amazon or an eBay or maybe some mega shopping apps. Very, very few individual retailers get a lot of traction through their apps. Some of the ways, some of the challenges with consumers shopping in mobile is that often they don't like to they don't like to complete transactions on mobile devices. Mobile has very terrible conversion. On average, most mobile, even m-commerce experiences will have less than 1% conversion. So some of the ways that retailers have addressed that is through this. This is a company called eBags in the US. They sell luggage and handbags. And what they do is that once you've added items to your cart on the mobile device, they allow you to email your cart to yourself. And that way you can, when you go to email on your desktop, you can then go back to that session, and they get a few benefits out of it too, because then they get enough information on the device IDs and the email address that links them so that they can match, even for the future, this device to that device, and they can connect the customer so you don't have as much of an attribution problem. Companies like eBay and Amazon are already doing this, but if you don't get that much frequency of visitation, this is a good way to try to help stitch that customer transaction together. Another bit is we're seeing more retailers that have loyalty programs integrating loyalty points into the mobile solutions. And this is another example from Starbucks, where the more you buy with Starbucks, you get free rewards, and those rewards can be redeemed on the mobile device. Same thing with other companies, the apparel retailer, The Gap. If you have rewards already with them, they'll allow you to use those mobile devices, those mobile rewards across all devices, including mobile. Other ways that we're seeing retailers engage information outside of the store is to provide that local information, the local inventory availability, and local information about the store that's nearest to them, like Lowe's is a home improvement store, and it's very similar. They have an execution that's similar to what Target did, which is they geosense the nearest store and they give information about the nearest store. The nearest store happens to be open until 10 p.m. tonight. And then Nordstrom is a department store. On every product detail page, they will tell you if that item happens to be available in the local store. Conversational commerce is also something that we're seeing emerging, and this is basically text-based commerce. And this is a company called Peach, which basically is a food ordering service, and they serve lunch in Seattle. Or in certain parts of Seattle. So if you want to, they have their menu and they say, this is what's for lunch, and they text it to the customers. And if you want to have that lunch, you've already set up an account, you just text back and say yes. And they'll then bring you the lunch at the time that they say that they'll bring you the lunch. So this is just very, very simple new ways to think about mobile-specific business experiences. We're also seeing a little bit of emergence in augmented reality. Not so much in retail sites. The example that I thought was best is Houzz, which is the interior design and visual home decor site. And they do sell some items, but what they do that's most interesting is, as you can see in this image, this is a chandelier, a light fixture that hangs from the ceiling, and what they do is that they allow you to view it in the room. So that's a room in my house, that's the image, that's the item, and you can just sort of, toggle it and simulate what it looks like. So that's a little bit of how we're seeing things changing. So the big questions, and I'm not going to go, this is one of the slides with a lot of words, but the things that we're hearing often about mobile are the importance of apps, where we're hearing a lot of retailers completely deprioritizing apps. I have an example of Patagonia, the outdoor equipment company that completely decided to kill its app and get rid of it. A lot of companies are thinking, how much do you focus on Apple versus Android devices? It really depends market by market. You look at a country like the U.S., it is most mobile transactions are very Apple specific. You look at a country like Germany, most mobile transactions are very Android specific. So you just have to look at what kind of devices are people using in different markets. Is responsive design essential? Usually what we say is that it is more important that key pages like checkout are adapted for your best devices, and everything else you can make responsive. Tablets have lost a lot of value, as I said before. And then the last questions, we hear a lot of questions about how important are beacons, and I'll share with you a slide later that says that most retailers are not investing at all in beacons. So from a responsive design standpoint, what we're seeing is that about half, almost 50%, 46% of retailers say that some or all of their pages are using responsive design, and only 37% of retailers are saying that they even have an iPhone app. So I think that that's important to keep in mind. This is the example from Patagonia, where they said this was the page on their app. They said, we're done with our app. There is no point for us having an app. Our customers visit us once, maybe twice a year. There is no need for an app. Beacons are a low priority for retailers. And as you can see at the very bottom, only 3% of retailers say that they're currently using beacons. And 46% have no plans to use beacons at all. So from an energy and kind of an investment standpoint, we're not really seeing much in beacons. The other piece that I will also point is that often we get questions around where should mobile sit in an organization, and there is no science to it. In half of the cases, what we see, as you can see for all respondents here on the left side, you have large companies on the right side. In 26% of cases, marketing or the CMO, the chief marketing officer, owns mobile. 23% of the time, the e-commerce team owns mobile. 17% of the time, a mobile person reports directly to the CEO. And then in 14% of cases, you have some position called the head of digital. I don't know why a head of digital would be different from e-commerce, but it is. And so it's all over the place. There's not really a consistent place where we're seeing mobile sit. Some of the questions I often get is, how do you sell well on a mobile device, and what are the things that are really important? And I kind of put together a framework, and I'll give you examples on the next slide. And I'll, kind of really essentially what it is your site has to be findable, you need to have utility, searchability, browsability, great design, and buyability. And let me go to the next slide and just share with you what we mean. From a findability standpoint, you want to do things like making sure that you've invested in mobile SEO and SEM, that you are present on very, very mobile-heavy marketing tools like Instagram and Facebook, if you are a visual company, and often that you're also taking into consideration location-based offers if you have a physical store. From a utility standpoint, this is where every mobile site needs to have good comprehensive content. If you do have physical stores, making sure that the inventory information is available. You've integrated things like digital receipts if you have, again, a physical store. For searchability, it's really good, especially when the screen size is so small and we have what we call a fat finger problem, where you misspell a lot because you're not typing in the right thing. That's where predictive search is really important, even on websites, the type ahead functionality that Google does really well. Browsability is really showcasing pictures, video, having a lot of scrolls so that you can get through a lot of of content even in a short period of time. Overall design is where it is about adaptive design on key pages and making sure that content loads well and looks good on everything else. And then buyability is integrating where possible things like Touch ID or alternative payments. You've probably heard that Apple ID is going to be coming to the mobile web in the next few months. So that's something that to keep an eye on. Right now it's only in app, and it should come to the web. And the next generation of mobile commerce, we think, is going to be even beyond the phone. You're not going to even need a device. And it will be things like you can press a button and order things, which is what the Amazon Dash button now allows you to do, where these basically you can press the button and it reorders one item from each of these brands. You also have artificial intelligence and voice-based commands from companies like Viv.ai. Viv was actually founded by the engineers that created Siri and sold it to Apple, and Viv actually was just purchased by Samsung. So these are some things to keep in mind. So I'm almost at the end, and I know that I'm over my time, so we'll hustle, as we say. So just to summarize, consumers are still, they're just getting used to using phones to shop in physical stores. So that's still new. Most of m-commerce still happens outside stores. When you are using the phone in the physical stores, consumers often want to make sure that they can find items, either locate the item that they don't see right in front of them, or if the item is not in the physical store, to be able to order it, and that's the endless aisle functionality. Consumers in general only like personalization if it provides usually some coupons or some values, usually like a lower price on particular items. Consumers do expect their favorite retailers to offer apps, but that's really kind of a small group of customers. And most large retailers do have apps, but most smaller retailers don't. And in fact, a lot of retailers, even amongst the large ones, are discovering they don't always need to even have apps. And then if you do have an app, it really is about serving your most loyal customers. And that's where integrating, for instance, if you give loyalty points or coupons, that it is incorporated there. One other piece to keep in mind, probably one of the most important metrics if you do have an app, is to think about what's the cost per download, and you want to maintain a certain cost per download. Other opportunities to differentiate yourself. Information, there's music in the background. I think, am I getting the hook to come off the stage right now? Okay, so one is so one of the things that we've heard about is often in a very large store, it's difficult to find a store associate. So an app can sometimes, increasingly we're hearing about functionality where a consumer can press a button on an app, and then that can signal to a store associate that this person is in need of help, come and help this person. And also, of course, the checkout for the associates. Wait time at checkout or parking lot availability, that was the example that I'd shared with you about the urgent care clinic, where a consumer can help to plan their visit better. You can also do similar products, visual search. That's something that we're seeing, is that that functionality where you can take a picture of something, and then there's visual recognition technology that can help to find other items that are similar. We're seeing that with Pinterest is integrating that type of functionality. There's some software or SaaS tools, I should say, in the US that also have a lot of that functionality came out of facial recognition. So there are often a lot of Israeli companies that do that, because the Israelis are very good at a lot of facial recognition technology, and they've applied that now to image recognition for shopping as well. And then the last is from a mobile commerce functionality standpoint, in-store flash offers. flash sales, location-based, time-specific, inventory finite sales do really, really well on mobile devices. So if you can integrate that into a store functionality, that can be really powerful. Okay, so that brings me to the end. This is my contact information, my Twitter handle, and my email addresses. I'll be around, although because my Spanish is limited, I don't know how much I'll understand. But I am happy to answer any questions that anyone has. I don't know if we have time for questions. No, it's maybe no time. All right, we're behind. So sorry. Thank you.